Hi, I'm Kevin Van Netten, a Pioneer sales rep from the beautiful Norfolk County here in Ontario, and you're listening to the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast.
Thanks for joining this special video episode of the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. My name's Andrew Campbell, and usually our episodes focus on the agronomy side of the business, but today we're going to focus on something that impacts every single farmer in the country. It's the issue of mental health. After all, we've all had tough days or tough seasons, but having the open discussions about those is something that's getting a larger focus and more support from the industry. My first guest is Megs Reynolds. She's the executive director of the Do More Ag Foundation. Have a look. First of all, Megs, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I think one of the things that we wanted to do in this episode really was bring to light the issue of mental health in agriculture. It's one that over the last number of years, I think there's more discussion on it, but probably still not enough. So let's start with the issue itself. What's the issue and why is mental health in agriculture as a discussion an important thing to talk about?
Well, mental health in agriculture has always been a challenge. I'm not going to say this is something new. I would say part of that is the stigma surrounding mental health. So we are a stoic industry. We are more kind of that cowboy tough it out. And when you're bottling everything up, you're not talking about it, you're not identifying and acknowledging that something is going on that maybe just means you're talking to a friend or maybe it means seeking professional help. Things just keep building. And we have about 85% of our producers living with some type of high stress to chronic stress level. And if we're not doing anything about it, we're not talking about mental health, we're not encouraging people to seek support and seek help, that's not a healthy, safe environment for everybody to be operating in.
So then, like when you do talk about those that are in the industry that are having issues, like what are some of the biggest triggers that are issues for them?
Well, unique to agriculture more so than a lot of other industries are just the overwhelming amount of factors that are outside of our control. So you've got the weather, which can completely, dictate whether you're successful or not as a crop farmer, which I used to be, and you can't control that. You can't set your commodity prices usually. You've got trade issues that are out of your control. There might be regulatory issues that are out of your control. Those on the animal side, they might be dealing with activists that are making their farm unsafe and they're scaring them and their family and making a biohazard risk. So there's a lot of moving pieces. And then there's just, again, back to that stigma piece where we haven't traditionally been an industry where we're comfortable talking about it and sharing what we're going through, what we're stressed about. And so when you combine all of that, it can be a very challenging environment for someone to take care of their mental health and their mental well-being.
Well, and just that, when you do talk about the stigma, not only that, but then like at certain times of the year, you're not seeing people very often. You're sitting by yourself, maybe you're in the barn by yourself. Like that isolation isn't a factor that helps either.
No, and you might have long periods of the day if you're, again, in a combine or a seeder where you're sitting there for 14 hours, running the numbers, watching the yield monitor. That's not good for anybody, right? And then you're also usually during those periods sleep deprived. So you might be functioning on 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and again, that has detrimental effects to our mental health. That's equivalent to basically operating as if you would be drinking, right? The lack of sleep relates to kind of how you function. So it is challenging in our industry.
Yeah. So then now Do More Ag is about a 4-year-old organization. Give me an idea then, why was it started and your role as executive director, what are you trying to achieve today?
So we were founded 4 years ago and basically came out of a direct message on Twitter to one of the founders, Kim Keller, and it was a community member who was not a farmer but on the business side, so supporting farmers, and they reached out saying, we just lost another farmer to death by suicide. Are there supports out there? What can we do to support? Why is no one talking about this? Why is nobody doing anything about it? And so Do More was founded basically to do more, and we operate on 3 pillars. We're really looking to bring awareness and education through, and in that piece, work to break the stigma. We're working to create community, and that's not just that physical. That can be the online find community or a place where resources are, fight that isolation piece. And then of course resources are our third pillar, and it can be challenging to find what is out there. And so we really try to bring everything together, whether that's provincial resources and crisis lines, federal support systems, as well as what might be specific to your location that we've made a connection with and know that they have an understanding of agriculture.
And one of the other things I've noticed too is in that 4 years, like whether it's you, whether it's one of the founders, like you're out speaking more about it. Like this is a topic that like never was on the agenda of a meeting, and now it's on lots of agendas.
Yes.
Do you think talking about it, bringing it up with farmers is kind of taking that stigma and taking that shell off of some producers?
100%. We have, over the past 4 or 5 years, there has been a lot more communication. I don't think we would have been standing here chatting about this 6 years ago. But what I've seen where we really have collectively, so everyone involved, moved the needle on the external stigma, there's still a lot of internal stigma. So that's where we could have all the support in the world. Our community doesn't care that we need to reach out for help. They're supporting us, saying, we think you should talk to somebody, but internally we're not able to accept or acknowledge that we do need support. I've had a lot, finally doing in-person events again and talking to producers and them saying, it's great that we're finally having this conversation. I totally support other people to go talk to someone if they need to. I would never do that because I don't need to, right?
Well, and that's the challenge, is that it's the reality of you, like you go to these in-person meetings, you say like, how are you doing? And everybody says, fine.
It's that trigger response,
like,
right?
Is it fine? Like, so then, like, let's break this into two sections here, is that, one that's looking for help and one that is responding to someone looking for help. For those that, do need help, and even if there is that still stigma, like, how do you approach the subject with a friend, a family member, somebody that you call that's a stranger on a helpline? Like, how do you start that conversation?
Well, first it comes to being able to identify, so have there been some changes in that person's life? Have they drawn away more socially? And that could be on social media as well. Is there an outward change in their appearance or maybe their farm's appearance that could mean that something's going on? Are they really, really negative about things? If you're starting to notice some of these signs, that's a great time to have a conversation and just say, like, use that. Hey, I've noticed, last 4 coffee rows you weren't there. Like, is something going on? Is everything okay? And then just create space to listen. Because we always feel like we need to fix everything and we need to solve everybody's problems, and we don't. What we do need to do is just create a place for someone to be able to share and then validate what they're sharing. We don't all experience things the same way, but that doesn't mean that how you're experiencing something is not true to you, right? So I need to be able to validate that. For someone who is reaching out for help, possibly calling a crisis line, you can call crisis lines when you don't even, what you would deem as a crisis is not going on. Maybe you've got questions. Maybe you're looking, for someone to talk to, but in your eyes, you wouldn't classify it as a crisis. They're a great resource for, to be able to make that call, and they're going to listen, and they're going to, when you're ready, be able to provide next steps and supports for you. You can also call a crisis line with a friend. There was an amazing thread on Twitter in the ag community this summer where an agronomist was on farm and noticed some things about a producer and, said, I think something's going on. Do you want to talk about it? Are you okay? And they said, no, I'm not. And she said, can I call a crisis line with you? And they said, yes. And so she made that call with them, sat there with them while they had some of that conversation, and then ultimately, left so that they could have that conversation on their own. But that's an incredible way to assist somebody when you're feeling maybe a little out of your depth, but making it easier and safer for them to reach out for that support.
Well, absolutely. Now, the one thing that, I wonder about that is just that comfort level, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that you need to be a counselor for this person. You just maybe sometimes need to just listen for a little while and help. Like, what a great example of help them find the actual support that they really need.
Yeah. And the Center for Suicide Prevention has a great campaign called the Buddy Up program. And basically it stemmed from understanding that men specifically have a much harder time of reaching out for help. So instead of asking men to reach out for help, they're saying, check in on your buddies. And even maybe you need to have a conversation with someone, but instead of calling them and say, hey, I need to talk, it's easier to say, hey, how are you doing? Like, let's have a real conversation. The fuel prices went up, fertilizer prices went up. Like, how are you feeling? Because I'm a little stressed. And then opening that door to that conversation.
Yeah. So now with Do More Ag, obviously you mentioned you've got lots of resources available for people interested. Where do they get more information, and what
what types of resources are there?
So our website is where everything lives. We have a resource page dedicated to everything, and that's at domore.ag. We've also created QR code support stickers that were designed to be in equipment cabs, on toolboxes, notebooks, wherever. We're trying to get those out through our network. Basically, we've been well trained now to use those QR codes, so scan it and it's going to connect you using your location to the crisis line specific to your province or territory. And from there, I would just say it's all of this is one conversation at a time. We're trying to change the culture in agriculture to one where all are supported and empowered to take care of their mental well-beings. And every time you're having a conversation with someone else, or you and I are having a conversation, that all is that positive move forward.
Now, in terms of like, if someone's struggling, I'm kind of interested in, like, we all tend to have probably negative coping mechanisms.
Yes.
Whether it's dull the pain, whether it's just, okay, we'll get through tomorrow, whatever. What are some of those, and what are some more healthy ones maybe?
Alcohol is something that is used a lot, especially in rural areas, and I think we've gotten to the point, especially in agriculture, where once you start creating a habit out of something, you're not realizing you're doing it, right? So you could have that hard day or that rain event, and it's like, oh, you better, let's get together for some whiskeys, right? And it kind of becomes that coping mechanism, and it can be a slippery slope. Gambling could be another one, online gambling, risky behavior, our cell phones even can become addictions. But when you're trying to kind of flip the self-care narrative and look for something instead of that, that could be getting physical exercise, creating endorphins. So if you're not, I personally like to run, but you could go for a walk. And that, could be fit into, maybe you're waiting for the tractor to warm up and you're able just to wander around for 5 minutes, but to do something that is good for you, that could be tinkering in the shop. That could be just sitting on the deck, having a coffee without anybody else around, right? Identifying what works for you. It's not all bubble baths, but definitely trying to work some positive self-care into your routine.
Well, thanks very much for not only all the work that you do and Do More Ag does, but obviously for joining the podcast. Thanks, Megs.
Thank you for having me on and for helping us continue the conversation on mental health.
One of the parts of that conversation with Megs that screams out to me is the 1 in 4 stat. The fact that 1 in 4 farmers in the last 12 months have thought about taking their life or have thought that their life isn't worth living. It's a sobering statistic, and it's where we start our next conversation with the president of Corteva Canada, Bryce Eager. With Bryce's years of experience in the industry, I asked him first just what a stat like that means to him.
Well, to start, Andrew, I think that it seems shocking when you first hear it, but then when you unpack it a little bit, it starts to make sense because, our farmers across the country, a lot of them work, relatively isolated, right? A lot of them are with themselves, in the cab of a tractor or a combine or a truck. And that, isolation that happens probably has an impact, right? You think about different parts of society and people that tend to not have as much social interaction on a daily basis, or are, working alone, the stats would be very similar. So it seems shocking, but then when you peel it back, it's like, oh no, it makes sense. Farmers are entrepreneurs. They're also, in many cases, working alone. They're not working next to a buddy or, a friend or a family member all the time. So, but that said, it also is really concerning because farmers, as we've talked as an industry, I mean, they provide for all of us. So if they're struggling and they're having a hard time dealing with, mental health issues and the stressors that are happening because of sometimes of what happens in the field and the environment and everything that is outside of their control, well, they're not at their best either. And so we need them to be at their best as much as possible. And yeah, that's kind of the way that I think about it. And it's important for us to recognize it and then make sure that we're taking action to support.
Well, then talk a little bit about that action, because one of the things, Corteva has committed to supporting Do More Ag, obviously, among other things. Talk a little bit about the action that you think is important for Corteva to take.
Yeah, as a one of the major ag companies in Canada, it's important for us to be able to provide funding for, Do More Ag and other associations that are providing support for agriculture in the mental health capacity. And so, when we look at it and when I think about it, uh, having people that are physically and mentally healthy, providing for us, like I mentioned, is really, really important. And so it is just part and parcel to what we should do as, good stewards for the industry and making sure that we support. No different than, we support 4-H, we support, food banks across the country, we support education. Mental health of our primary customers is so important. So it just needs to be part and parcel to what we do.
Well, and it definitely is exciting to hear that $20,000 is being invested again this year. It goes to a whole bunch of things that I know Do More Ag is doing. One of the things that they were pushing for hard was this national crisis line, one number for people to reach out to. That took a lot of work to get to, Bryce. What do you think it'll do on this issue?
Well, I think that ease of access makes for ease of use, right? And right now, if you think about what we've been trying to do as an industry and Do More Ag, we had a conversation back a number of months ago, and we came up with the idea of putting together a QR code that could be placed into, the cab of a tractor or combine. And so we came up with that idea so that, if a farmer was struggling, all they needed to do was take out their phone and hit that QR code, and it would bring up the local number that they could call to get support, which was a great idea to bridge until we got to the point where, a 3-digit number, no different than 911. Everybody in Canada knows 911. Well, everyone is going to know, and I believe the number is 988. Have to check on that, but that number, when it comes into operation, is going to simplify the access for farmers or for anybody in the country. It's going to make it so that it's only, a short call away, and you're not going to have to fumble through things to be able to get a chance to talk to somebody. And that is going to make a huge difference in so many people's lives.
Yeah. Oh, I certainly think it will, because just that, when you talk about that QR code, even, just to have that, here's the number, here's where I can get help. That's a big one. Another big one is obviously just, using the community around you. And I know, there still does exist that stigma a little bit to can I open up to my neighbor? Can I open up to my friend about this? From your experience in working with the industry, what are some of those really practical things that all of us, whether we're struggling or not, can do to make sure we're looking out for each other?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, one, to be present with people and to take a genuine interest. And, part of it is asking how things are going is one step, but then the next step, which is something that we've put into practice internally at Corteva, and we're not perfect at it, but it's kind of 3 little words, and it's, are you okay? And making sure, especially as we've gone through the last few years and what the pandemic threw at us that nobody was prepared for, our HR leader in Canada, a gentleman named Vic Hale, really posed upon us the thought that we need to check in with each other very frequently, right? Because things change. So being observant, actually taking a genuine interest and having a conversation with people and being accessible, right? Picking up the phone and talking to somebody that you haven't talked to for a while and checking in is so easy these days. We're all attached to a phone. We've got the ability to do it just about anywhere. Well, actually, we've got the ability to be on a phone in too many places, I think is probably a fair way to say it. But we can use it for good. And that for me is the important step, is making sure that we are making connections. And then when we are physically present with somebody, be observant and make sure that you're having a good conversation with them, and not just about the weather, right? Really try and be meaningful. It's not easy to get into some of those discussions, but I think it's important to be able to have that discussion, make sure people are doing okay.
Yeah, important. It definitely is, Bryce. Well, Bryce, thanks very much for joining us and for obviously your support and Corteva's support on this really important initiative. Thanks, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate everything that you do.
That's our special video episode of the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. We're in our 4th season of the podcast, and we've focused on everything from how to get your crop off to its best possible start to several episodes about disease or weed pressures that you've got to watch out for. So search the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast on platforms like Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts.